America's right has launched an unprecedented attack on public education. What is at stake for Black students around the country? What effects do race neutral policies and DEI bans have on Black and marginalized students? And there's a push for vouchers in lieu of public education around the country in many states. Isn't that actually good for Black kids because then their parents will get to decide what institution is best for them? Well, I'm glad you asked because we're talking about it after the break.
Brokers, welcome to another episode of Brokers, where we talk about the unbelievable ish this country has done to keep us broke. Now here are your hosts, Amber and Erika.
Hey brokers, I'm Amber.
And I'm Erika.
And today on Brokish, y'all, we are talking about the miseducation of the Negro, literally and figuratively.
Look, Carter G told us so long ago, and we are still having these same conversations, Amber.
Yes, we are. And I hate that for us, but as usual, I'm happy that we here at Brokish are trying to shed lights on things so that people can know where to focus their time and energy and how to be invested in the fights that are happening around us. So God is still on the throne. God is still on the throne. How you doing, boo? How you doing?
I'm doing great, Amber. So last time we got together, I know everybody wants to get caught up, so I'm happy to catch everybody up. It was my birthday, so I'm sad that it's not my birthday anymore. However, I just got back from my birthday trip. It was very nice. So I got to hang out with my boo. You know, we were holding hands and going to speakeasies and just doing all the things. So it was very, very cute and exciting. I loved it.
Excuse me. That sounds lovely. You left out a part.
What was that?
About the birthday gift that Zelina and I gave to you that, you know, brought you to tears early in the morning.
Let me tell you how your friends are really your worst enemies. So Amber and Delina know that I have disdain for Michelle Obama for a variety of reasons. Okay, like I just do. And especially because I get so mad at people talking about when they go low, we go, no, we don't go high. Okay. We go to hell and back and all over again. So because they're not really my friends, they sent me this big old like 24 by 36 whatever canvas of Michelle Obama in pink and green, even though she's not an AK, just to make me sick. They send this to me and they have like a whole ceremony around her unveiling and had my own child wrap this thing up for me. So no, I forgot about that. And in fact, I found a good home for Michelle Obama. I have a friend who's taken her off my hands because she's not staying in my house.
Wow. I was hoping that it would be framed behind you today. So I was a little disappointed when I got on. But y'all, the capping is real in these streets, as my kids would say. I mean, we could feel the tears, the emotion, all of it. And so, you know, I'm just happy that I could put a smile on somebody's face, you know. So, you know, listen, God is using me in great ways in this world.
So, Amber, outside of being a hater, what have you been doing? Like, let's get the people caught up on you.
I mean, listen, honestly, I haven't been doing a whole lot. I am in the middle of reorganizing my closet, which is, you know, triggering all of my, you know, emotional traumas. All of my clothes are in the tub in my bathroom. And so I'm, you know, right now, life is lifing a little bit. I can't find nothing, you know.
You mean your interior decorator didn't do that for you, Amber? Your personal organizer didn't do that for you? Like
it's really rich for the rich.
Not a member of your staff didn't do that for you?
I don't have no staff. I got a bunch of kids. They are all on, you know, PIPs. And so that wasn't an option. So yes, I am doing it myself and it's taking forever. I done wore the same 3 things to work in rotation for the last like 3 weeks. So I'm really just trying to clean out my closet, y'all. That's all I'm doing right now. God bless me.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's great. Amber, I am so excited about today because we have a guest and I actually have personal experience with this guest's work. My children have heard it. And so I am very just thrilled. So you go ahead, make the introductions.
So y'all, we have with us today here on Brokish, we have Mike Hixenbaugh, who is author of the New York Times best-selling book. Congratulations, by the way, they came for the schools. But I think he first came into Erika and I's orbit through his smash podcast, Southlake. And so, Erika and I, for most of y'all who know, we are Dallas suburb girls. And so I have the horrible pleasure of having formerly lived in one of the suburbs in the Hall of Shame in Mike's book. I lived in Prosper for 10 years. So we are very personally acquainted with his work. It went down in the group chat while we were listening. And so we are so excited to have him with us. He's an investigative reporter for NBC News. Mike has been named a Pulitzer Prize finalist, and he's also won a Peabody Award for his reporting on the battle over race, gender, and sexuality in America's classrooms. And so They Came for the Schools is his first book, and it is the winner of the prestigious Lucas Work in Progress Award. And so Hixenbaugh's work at newspapers in Ohio, North Carolina, Virginia, and Texas has uncovered deadly failures in the U.S. military, abuses in child welfare system, and safety lapses at major hospitals. All things we talked about on Brokish. Y'all need to go back and listen. We ain't crazy. See? And he currently lives in Maryland with his wife and 4 children. And we are so happy to have him with us today to talk about They Came for the Schools and the unprecedented attack on public schools here in the United States, y'all.
I'm really excited to joining y'all, and you living in North DFW suburbs or in the Dallas-Fort Worth suburbs, wherever you're at, you're the target audience for this book. In a lot of ways, I wrote it for anyone anywhere in the country who's seeing this, but y'all have a special connection to it. So thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming. And before we get started, I do just want to say this. So your work on the Southlake podcast really did help my family to come together on a few things. We were actually on our way to Houston to visit family. And so it was just me and my 2 daughters in the car, and they're, at the time, middle and elementary school age. And so we played the podcast there and back. And just the amount of questions and the dialogue, and still we talk about it. So thank you for your work, because I know sometimes you put stuff, well, you know how well it's been received, so But anyway.
Well, I still love to hear it.
Yes. So I appreciate that as a parent in terms of what it unlocked for us to be able to talk about. And so thank you for that.
Yeah, I co-produced that podcast with my colleague Antonia Hilton, and we were just overwhelmed, I think, by that kind of feedback that you just shared. I think what was special about the Southlake podcast was we just happened to be telling a story that was resonating all over the country, and we were able to publish it right at that moment when everyone was kind of experiencing all over the place the same kind of backlash in their local suburb or their local community. And it also just spoke to some universal experiences of trying to get a good education for your kid if you're a Black person in America. And so I feel like that was, it was really gratifying to hear those responses, and a big part of the reason why I wanted to keep digging into the story and write the book.
Yeah. And it's interesting because one of the things I think you did is I think you gave a voice or an articulation to a lot of the things those of us who do live in suburbs were experiencing, but we couldn't quite put the line together. Because how I found out about Southlake was actually a connection to one of the people you write about in the book, Nikki Olayele's. Her stepmom is a friend of mine. And so I ran into her one day and she's just talking to me. And she brought it up and I was like, well, what's going on? Because she's just like, there's a podcast about it. You need to listen to it. And she was like, it's exactly what's happening out here in Frisco and Prosper. You need to go listen to it. And that is how I found it. And I just felt like, in that moment, it was just like, girl, I don't even have enough time to try to explain it to you, but somebody explained it for us. So just go listen to it. And so I think it's really great because a lot of times this country is very good about gaslighting people, and you kind of know what you feel, but it's very hard to put words to it when you're just sort of in your own little microcosm. So I think it's been so helpful for many of us to confirm we are not crazy. We are not crazy.
And so, Mike, because there are going to be several of our listeners we call brokers who may not have heard the podcast, who haven't had a chance to get the book yet. So if you could just ground us in what you think Southlake is all about and what you all hoped to achieve with that work.
Yeah. So in the podcast and in the book, I try to tell the story of the assault on America's public schools that you're seeing in the news by going deep in one place, and to show how that story has played out in one suburb. And so in the podcast and in the book, it's Southlake, Texas. And for those who don't know or who aren't in DFW, it is, it's, if you're in some other suburb or metro area, it's the neighborhood where your rich friend lives. Like it's the place where outsiders love to hate it, and if you live there, you got a lot of pride in where you live. A lot of, in this case, Southlake, the Carroll school system, the Carroll Dragons football team. There's a lot of dragon pride in Southlake, and its story is similar to a lot of different suburbs across the country. Communities that were created in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s in the aftermath of desegregation. And these spaces were, in a lot of ways, designed for white folks to get their kids an education where they wouldn't have to go to school with black children. Southlake didn't have explicitly racist, covenants or rules to keep black people out, because largely the town was developed after the civil rights movement. But like a lot of suburbs, it imposed zoning policies that prohibited affordable housing, that prohibited apartments, that required new development to be on large acre, like a half acre of land, with large home sizes. And as a result, the community, because wealth is often a proxy for race in America,
and black people are brokish.
Perfect. After centuries of explicit discrimination, as a result, by keeping Southlake wealthy, they had in effect kept Southlake white. That's the story of suburbs all over the country. But in the last 30 years, that story has shifted, and lots of black middle class parents and other parents of students of color have moved to these suburbs, seeking the same American dream that white folks were after. They wanted to get their kids a good education. They saw the test scores and the nice facilities, and moved into places like Southlake. And so I share all of that because I think that piece of the story, that setup, has been missing from our national conversation and coverage of the school board fights over race and CRT or DEI, because that's all. That historical context is important to keep in mind before we get to 2020, when across the country, school districts like the Carroll School District in Southlake were starting to grapple with the reality that black students had been experiencing for 2 or 3 decades in these diversifying suburbs, which is, they're getting often a really good education, but the cost of that is racist jokes from their classmates, microaggressions, the kind of things that you all probably, your kids experience, where a white student will come up and try to touch a black girl's hair and make a comment about why does it feel like that, or white kids talking to her, a black classmate who she considers a friend, and saying, hey, you're the smartest black girl I know, to the more extreme side where white kids not understanding, or maybe they do understand, or maybe they just are ignorant, using the N-word casually in the hallway with black classmates, or making jokes like, how do you get a black out of a tree? You cut the rope. These are all examples that I heard from students and parents in Southlake. And so by 2020, in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder and the protests for racial justice, school districts in lots of places were trying to grapple with this, and their way of grappling with it was to bring in DEI consultants or to form committees to come up with diversity plans to try to address that culture. And I will say in Southlake, that effort was led by conservatives, conservative members of the school board, and progressives. And it was really an attempt to try to make the town live up to its reputation and the school district live up to its reputation. And so the podcast and the book tells the story of what happened after those efforts were rolled out. The DEI plan in Southlake was introduced to the community right in the midst of a really tumultuous political season where Donald Trump was warning that Black Lives Matter and Antifa and Joe Biden were going to destroy the suburbs. And in that climate, conservative and far right folks in Southlake and across the country got organized to try to stop these changes. And that's kind of the story I tell in Southlake as a way of, if you're sitting in another suburb, you mentioned Frisco, Prosper, or if you're in the suburbs outside of Philadelphia or outside Atlanta or outside of Nashville, and these same things are playing out, you could read the story of Southlake, Texas, and understand that history and better understand why that's happening in your community.
Yeah.
You said so many things, and there's so many directions that I want to go in. But Amber, do you want to go? Because I can go if you're not ready to go.
No, you go, girl. You got it.
So, okay. One of the things that's really interesting for me as clearly a Black parent is the idea of a good education, right? And so I do want to double click on what that means, because I think, like you alluded to, we have these ideas about what a good education is. And I think oftentimes we're willing to sacrifice our children to get it. And so I think that's folly. But so in my own personal example, I live a mile away from two schools, one school that I'm zoned to and one school that's in my district, but I'm not zoned to. The one school that I'm zoned to has 98% of the children are not socioeconomically disadvantaged. So everybody who goes to this school has to live in my neighborhood. We don't have any children or families from apartments, right? It's all neighborhood kids. And as a result of that, it's also like, let's say 2/3 white, less than a third of the people who are from India primarily, and then everybody else. So then the school that I'm not zoned to is like the reverse. So you have 2/3 of the kids who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. Most of them are Hispanic Latino kids. Then you have white kids. Then you have Indian kids, and then everybody else. And so my husband and I made a specific choice that we didn't want to send our kids to a school that had virtually no ethnic diversity, in a place where you don't even have children coming from what, you call in the book and other people call high density housing, right? Like, which is a dog whistle for a whole lot of things. But anyway. Mm-hmm. And so as a parent, we made this choice, and there were some small sacrifices, like I didn't get a school bus, some other things like that. And everybody doesn't have the ability to make those choices. But that was a choice that I made. It's like, if I'm going to send you to a place, I want to send you to a place where there are more people like you, where it's not just a monolith. And I'm just wondering, in your work, when people talk about good education, and I'm of course seeking good education for my children, but I'm looking at good education broadly. It's not just about test scores. It's not just about academic results. I want to know if you have an arts program. I want to know if you have a library, all of these other kinds of things. So how do the parents define that?
Yeah, I think there's a more and more people that I'm hearing from are viewing it just like you are. But I think for a generation of, not to paint with a broad brush, but the people that I talked to who moved to Southlake a generation ago, the Black parents who went to this majority white community, they were defining a good education based on greatschools.org. Like, how good are the test scores, right?
Yeah.
And that's broadly speaking how a lot of Americans look at this. They make decisions about where to buy their house based on what rating that school has, how they perform on standardized tests. And I note in the book that there's lots of research that shows that those metrics largely are just measuring the wealth of the parents and the community, and the concentration of wealth in those communities. And so, the best rated schools have the richest kids, the highest proportion of, like you were just discussing, where there's not a large population of lower income families. And so, yeah, I think that I think that some of the parents of Black kids that I write about in the book were thinking only about that. And maybe, having an awareness that, oh, my kid is going to be one of only a handful of Black students in this school district, but maybe they didn't have a full understanding of what that would mean. And so for them, it was, because that's not the childhood that they had. And they thought, this is the American dream. I got to get the best possible education for my kid. And so they moved there. And so, in the book and in the podcast, we tell the story of Robin Cornish and her husband, Frank, who raised 5 kids in Southlake. And they talk about it. They look back on these, their kids are all grown now. But Robin looks back on it and she realizes her kids did get the academic stuff and opportunities that they were aiming for. But it was almost only after looking back at the whole picture that she realized how much her kids suffered as a result of it.
Yeah.
Because you're conditioned. I think she and other people that I spoke to, and again, I'm coming at this as a white guy who grew up in a white school district.
Sure.
And so if this is journalism, I'm hearing their perspectives on this, and they felt almost like they and their kids felt conditioned to this is normal. It's like the oxygen we breathe this is part of it. These racist comments, these racial slurs, you just kind of come to expect that's going to be part of life, and that's normal. It's annoying. I hate it. But then it all adds up to something much bigger over the course of years. Things that these kids, some of them young adults, are now working through in therapy, or after they went off to college, they realized, oh, wait, this is the culture that I was educated in isn't actually reflective of America overall. I can go, there are more diverse places. What I'm saying is, if you're a Black kid growing up in Southlake, the culture is a whole lot different. If you move to the East Coast and go to college at a very diverse university. And so they were seeing this thing where I'm the one Black kid in my class and targeted by everybody. That is not the same everywhere. That it didn't have to be that way. And so
Right.
I think there are parents now, especially now in this era where it's so explicit that school districts like Carroll and others are saying, we're going to be colorblind. We're not going to have DEI. We're not going to teach kids. We're not going to address this stuff. We're just not going to talk about it and let the parents sort it out. And I think a lot of Black parents are now who had those views that I just described, are reevaluating and thinking, wait, is there more to a good education for my kid than just whatever the great schools rating is? And I know a lot of people are trying to figure that out. But I think you just alluded to it, there's not, because of the way schools are funded in America, there's not a clear answer. There's not here's the best spot. Your kid's going to thrive here better than over here. It's almost an impossible choice that parents are having to make, with this now layered on top of it.
Yeah. Well, the flip side of that is, as some people grapple with how to define what a good education is, one of the things that I think the book does a really good job of painting is that there is a swath of people in this country on the right who have a very specific definition of what a good education is. And I just want to talk a little bit about that.
Is it no Negroes allowed? Is it?
I mean, listen, Erika, why are you talking about the color of your skin?
Right.
Stop talking about the color of your skin. I want to know about the content of your character, even though I don't want my kids to learn about Martin Luther King. But stop. You're talking about your skin too much, okay?
Yes,
but I am not appalled, but as I read and go through like things like your book and realize like how deliberate this is, I just wonder if you believe that how they are attempting to redefine education or how they are attempting to wield the power in the public school, like do you feel like this is a historical attempt to sort of, because what I wonder is like, is this misinformation or disinformation? Like, is this really a misguided attempt to sort of deal with some of the very valid issues we have inside of public schools? I mean, public education, there's definitely room to talk about things that we can do better, but it feels very nefarious, I must admit. Like, as I read the book, as I connect it to what has happened in history, it feels nefarious.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I noticed something interesting while documenting this now over the course of 3 years and 3.5 years. What started out as the campaign initially, what we were calling, the backlash against so-called critical race theory in schools, and the way that term was redefined to describe any kind of discussion of race. It started out as, let's remove something from schools. But as that became a very powerful wedge issue for conservatives and Republican activists, other groups that have long had predate this, that have goals that go beyond schools and that long predate this current moment, saw an opportunity in the kind of, anger at school boards in the suburbs, and so it pivoted from remove, like this. Ron DeSantis would always talk about, I'm going to remove ideology from classrooms and go back to like this some neutral kind of perspective. But when you actually like looked at what kind of policies were being implemented after that, in late 2021 into 2022 and the year since, they've removed ideology. Yes, they've banned certain perspectives, like explicitly banned the 1619 Project from schools in several states, including Texas. They've, banned divisive concept, what they define as divisive concepts, usually, dealing with a critical lens on race and racism and its role in central role in America's founding. But then they don't stop there. They also are working to impose a different worldview. It's, not removing ideology. They're removing ideology and then prioritizing or imposing their preferred worldview, typically a Christian conservative worldview. And so you're seeing like this idea that schools in Texas have to teach a patriotic version of American and Texas history. And that if you do teach kids about slavery, which we should do, but if you do that, you have to make sure the kids know that this was a deviation or a failure to live up to America's true and good and pure, non-racist founding ideals.
Sure.
And all of it became very much entwined with, I'm sorry, my microphone just dropped out of here. Can you still hear me good?
Yep.
All of it became entwined with this this long-standing push by a segment of the Christian right in America to paint a picture of America and American history that doesn't exist, but that they want to exist. The idea that America was founded as explicitly as a Christian nation, that was kind of blessed by God to spread the gospel to all nations across the world. If you have that view of America as this, good and holy almost endeavor, the narrative around slavery and Jim Crow complicates that a lot. And so what you see is this kind of push to whitewash that, to minimize that, to paint a picture of America as good, and white America in particular as good, and kind of to decomplicate the messy history that is the reality. And so I think a lot of that, what we saw initially in 2020 and 2021, that you could probably, some of the parents just cramming into school board meetings and tearfully talking about not wanting their kids to be taught that they're inherently a racist and those sorts of things. Misinformation. I think you can attribute some of that to, like, they heard a story and they believed it. But there's also a big push to, like, proactively muddy the water and to create what I think are straw men. Like, the reporting shows are straw men arguments. This idea that, what these progressives or black parents really want is to teach all white kids that they're oppressors and teach all black kids that they're victims. And that's what you heard over and over and over. You hear that over and over and over again. But you can't find anywhere where that's
right,
like, happening, where that right. language is, the conversation seemed to be around, let's teach kids the full picture of America's history. Like, this idea that America's public schools had been taken over by the woke left for the last 30 years. It's hard to rectify that with the idea, the fact that most Americans didn't know the Tulsa race massacre existed until 2020. Most probably still don't, but more of us do now. I didn't learn that growing up in school. A huge swath of the country was taught a false myth about why we fought a civil war, and so as a result, like, a fifth of U.S. adults still believe
states' rights.
This kind of the false story that the war was over states' rights and not slavery. And so I think that's all part of what's going on here.
But the part that sorry.
I was about to say, I'm sure your fourth grade teacher did a smashing job of teaching you about critical race theory, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Garrettsville, Ohio, we were definitely all into bell hooks, and we were doing that.
Yeah. It's so silly, though, because most teachers in the United States are white women. So basically they're saying, we think all these white women are getting on platforms that they have every day to go into schools and teach white children to hate themselves. Like, it just doesn't even make sense on a fundamental level.
So one of the stories I tell in the book, this fourth grade teacher named Christina McGurk, who's a young white Christian, grew up in a conservative home teacher, who got into teaching because she said she wanted to, like, live out her faith and to to just teach kids, and she was genuine. And so as she became an adult and experienced a world outside of her mostly white hometown and did some Teach for America work, she came to realize that, part of that mission is to teach kids to be kind to each other, to teach kids to understand that racism exists and how to confront that. And so she was teaching in Southlake, but she didn't know anything about critical race theory. She was like the kind of teacher who would pull out, like a picture book with MLK, right? But even that became controversial. This idea that, we're going to fight we're fighting against critical race theory, and what we really want to get rid of is this idea that you're going to teach white kids that they're all oppressors. But in practice, what happened was they were mad that she was giving kids scholastic news magazines that included articles with a debate about Confederate monuments. It's painstakingly neutral framing, explaining how in 2020 some cities were moving to remove Confederate monuments, and this is part of this national reordering of memory and how we look back at the past. And the article included that some people think it's wrong to remove the monuments, and parents freaked out, and these teachers had to pull the magazines because parents in Southlake were so upset that their kids were even learning that conversation existed. That's not critical race theory. That's just current events and history.
Right.
And so that teacher, you know, a young white woman, was eventually driven out of the school district over this stuff.
And that's why, Amber, to your question of misinformation or disinformation, I don't know. I just can't believe that people are that naive. Like in my heart of hearts, I just can't believe that they are. I think there is a whole lot more disinformation in terms of what we see going on and specific attempts to like, and so DeSantis is like, I'm getting rid of ideology that I don't like, and I'm gonna introduce all the ideology that I believe in, for example, right? And I think these attempts are purposeful. I think they are targeted. I just don't think that these things are as benign as we want to believe that they are.
No, and I think the book actually talks about that, because I think some of the things that are happening now are becoming much, much more explicit. One of the things that Erika and I hate probably as much as white supremacy is toxic theology here in Brokish space. And I am so glad that you brought up some of the toxic theology that fuels the misinformation and disinformation that we see taking root in a lot of these suburban school districts. And so I feel like they are talking about it now. And, you know, with things like the dominionist theology, the seven mountains. And so I was really glad to see you connecting those dots for people, because it is very real and it is very much a part of the political discourse that is not talked about much, because for so long it was considered fringe. But absolutely, this is a power play to create an establishment that upholds a power framework for people who are trying to, across all spectrums of American life, stake their claim as being at the center.
Absolutely. One of the things as I mentioned, I that started off as this anti-CRT thing and very much a backlash that Black Lives Matter and the 1619 Project. But there's this long-standing movement on the Christian right to basically end the separation of church and state, which they believe was a false doctrine, not how the country was really intended to be. And that, in fact, at first America was an explicitly Christian nation, and only became a secular nation in the 1960s when the Supreme Court wrongly removed prayer and mandatory Bible readings. And so that movement is decades old, and it was invigorated with Trump's election. Amazing, kind of, ironically, that Donald Trump would be shepherding this revival of far right Christian political theology, but because of some of the moves he made to bring those people pushing that movement into his administration and into his circle of advisors, that we saw a resurgence in this idea of Christian dominion, the idea that America was a Christian nation and that we need to push forward on this. And the backlash against DEI, especially in schools, the folks leading that charge saw that as just a great opportunity. They said so explicitly, like, here's our chance. And this guy David Barton, who's based in Texas. Texas brings a lot of things to the nation. David Barton's one of them. He has for 3 decades been the leader of pushing this idea that America was founded as a Christian nation. Thomas Jefferson was an evangelical Christian, and they all wanted America to be explicitly Christian. And in fact, when the First Amendment's establishment clause saying that the government can't establish religion, he claims that what they really meant is the government can't establish a denomination, because the country is Christian, and the government just can't say which denomination is right. That's kind of the story he tells. Well, in the midst of this backlash, he did an event in in Grapevine, the town next to Southlake, and was there with school board members, newly elected far-right school board members from Southlake and Grapevine and Keller and Mansfield. Yeah. And he basically laid out the plan. He said, y'all, now that we have the Supreme Court, Trump has nominated these justices to the court. We have the supermajority. The tide has shifted. And what you school board members need to do now that you're in office is to bring prayer back. Let's get the 10 Commandments up in all the classrooms. Let's start singing the Christian hymns at Christmas time. No more of this, happy holidays stuff. And he told them, if you do this, hopefully someone will sue you. That way we can take that case to the Supreme Court and get a win for America as a result, basically overturn the separation of church and state. And you're seeing this in Texas and Louisiana. Just yesterday, I think the legislature there passed a bill that Texas was playing with to mandate that the 10 Commandments be posted in every public school classroom. And yeah, this started. Race is still essential to all of this because of the things I said earlier about how, this depiction of America as good and godly, white America as good and godly since the beginning, and kind of shaving off those warts or minimizing the cost of slavery or deflecting. That's all part of this, but it's also part of this push to elevate and impose this specific version of Christianity on society.
And it's so interesting that you talk about how that's happening, on a national level, right? In terms of we need to protect the founding fathers' original ideals, right? About whatever they were. And then you see that in Southlake in terms of their tag of protect the tradition. So can you talk to us about what, for many of these local people in some of these bedroom communities, what protecting the tradition means to them?
Well, I can speak to it based on the history and their actions, because as you mentioned, Southlake for the last 20 or so years has had this slogan of protect the tradition. And what they say is it's their tradition of excellence in academics and athletics. But lots of people beginning in 2020 started pointing to that and saying, if we're going to have that slogan, we should take a look at what that means in totality. And so it means looking back at the history of the town and the experiences of Black and LGBTQ kids in the school system. And there seems to be a resistance to making that part of that conversation. So, that the counter is always like, what tradition are we protecting? What is this tradition? And yeah, so I think for some people who move to the suburbs for a very specific type of community, white folks, some move there because they see the demographics, the wealth, and they're protecting their kids. They sometimes say this explicitly. It's protecting their kids from the kinds of stuff you see in Dallas, and they'll point to people are always tagging me in videos of like classroom fights from some city school district somewhere, and like this doesn't happen, and it's a room full of Black kids, and it's impossible to look at this and not see like race. It's right in front of you, but they'll deny that, right? They'll say
it's the violence.
Southlake knows how to run their schools. That's why our test scores are good. And Dallas ISD doesn't know how to run their schools. That's why their test scores are bad. That's kind of as far as they're willing to go in the conversation, right? And it's never becomes like can we go back further and try to understand why poverty is concentrated like this, and why race is a proxy for wealth in America, why those schools have these struggles, and why yours don't. They see it all as this is a meritocracy. I'm successful because we worked hard. Other people aren't because they didn't. and that's the narrative, that's the story, that's the tradition, I think, that they have in mind.
So, what do you think that the end game is for all of this? Because I know that one of the things that I think you bring out in the book, surprise, surprise, there's a lot of dark money behind this, a lot of billionaires that are funneling a lot of money into trying to change the narrative around public schools, replacing public schools with voucher programs, this myth that, you know, everybody should just be able to take their $8,000 and go educate their kids and, you know, change the world. And so I just want to know, you know, kind of what you think the end game is and whether you think it is at all tied to defunding public schools just across the country.
Well, so last night there was a primary runoff in Texas, and Governor Greg Abbott's preferred candidates did very well. And so it's just to fill in the details, Greg Abbott has been on a crusade to get private school vouchers in Texas. And that's fallen short repeatedly in Texas because most rural Republicans in Texas oppose school privatization or private school vouchers, or what they call school choice, because there's not really another option in a lot of these rural towns that have like a total class student population of like 200 kids, K through 12. There's no private school to send their kids with that $8,000. And so they just see this as a negative. And so for the last two legislative cycles, Abbott's been really pushing on that. And he just, you know, they ran primary opponents against a lot of House Republicans, rural Republicans who oppose this stuff. And with a lot of support from far right Christian billionaires in Texas, were able to win a bunch of those races. And it's clear from the way Abbott has talked about it that he has pointed to woke indoctrination in public schools that he oversees, that the state of Texas oversees, as the reason why we need these private school vouchers to give parents choice. He said that he did a tour of majority white, exclusively Protestant Christian private schools to make the case for vouchers last year. And at every stop, he talked about, we must end woke indoctrination, give parents a choice, pass this bill. And so he's explicitly using the anger, whether it's real or not, the kind of backlash against DEI in public education and public institutions to make the case for, you know, here's a way parents can be in control of where they send their kids. And I'm sure you all know there's like this history of that there's this, you know, go back further and you realize that the kind of origin and the first attempt at private school vouchers in Texas was in the 1950s as a response to desegregation, that white lawmakers in Austin wanted to give parents money to, if their kid would be forced to go to a desegregated public school, those white families could take the money and send them to a private school. And it's impossible. No, it's not impossible. It's not telling the whole story to leave that context, I guess, out of what's happening now.
Absolutely.
This is where I really think we could use some class solidarity, right? This is where I really would hope that we would be able to overcome racism and whiteness and what it means to some of those folks in these rural places, to be able to see we have some needs that are similar to yours, and can we figure out how do we overcome them together? But it's like, alas, it feels like in this country we're never able to do that. But I think a class politic would be so helpful right now, because the decimation of public schools is just, the idea of it makes me so sad. And I know individually, because, you know, Amber, you and I have a friend who probably is into the idea of like school choice. And personally, I know people who are like in some bad situations and want to do that. But if we're looking at this in aggregate, it just, class politics would be so helpful.
And it also is a reminder that this $8,000 coupon for most people, the private schools that Greg Abbott tours, A, they're not
Cost
going to let your kids in,
$30,000.
period. And B, even with your $8,000 coupon,
Prestonwood still wants another $20,000 from you.
that's correct. That's correct. And I feel like there is a very concerted attempt to misstate the significance of this voucher. You know, I went to Hockaday. You go to Hockaday with $8,000, and they're going to say, "Would you like M&Ms or Skittles?" and and send you on your way. And so I feel like there are a lot of people who just don't appreciate how little this does for the people who are going to be most affected, because all this is for most people who are advocating for it is an $8,000 discount off tuition they're already paying.
Yes,
they're already paying. But for people who they are saying, oh, look what this is going to do for your kid, that $8,000 is not going to get them anywhere closer to the education that people like Abbott are promising to them, because all it's going to do is incentivize the private schools to cut financial aid funds and be like, oh, you have a voucher now.
Yeah. It's just going to get you a charter school that does not have a librarian or a library, that does not, you know, Amber, you and I have kids with dyslexia, that is not mandated to offer services, 504 services to their kids, that doesn't have arts program. That's what you're going to be relegated to.
And you're going to usher back in overt racism. And one of the things I'm so glad you brought up in the book, because again, I think these are the things that people don't think about, is what happens to queer kids? What happens to people who the closest best private school is a Christian school, but they have to get a letter from a pastor, or they have to affirm a set of beliefs that is not true to them and their families. And so one of the things that I was really glad about, we talk a lot here on Brokish about the fact that liberation is a group project. And one of the things I really appreciated about both the book and Southlake series is it shows how hatred metastasizes. So it starts in the center at the racism, and then you see how it spreads out beyond anti-DEI to now we're talking about queer policies. And to me, one of the most profound things you did with the book, one thing we don't talk about a lot is what oppression does to the marginalized immediately, it does to the privileged eventually. And I felt like there was just this sweet cherry kiss when you talked about how Patriot Mobile mobilizes against Michelle Moore, the company her husband founded. It is just the full circle of how hatred eventually metastasizes to affect everybody. And I feel like we are watching this happen without recognition that eventually it comes for all of us, you know? And so, yeah, we defund the schools now, but what happens when it's your turn, right? And I think that's why we all have to be invested. And that's why I feel like this work is so valuable, because it kind of shows how we see the hatred going from one community to the next, affecting people at all walks of life, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of conservative voting Republicans who've been targeted by all of this. One of the points I make in the book that, in order to justify the attack, they have painted anyone supporting these things as far left Marxists, and a lot of these communities, it was conservative, maybe Mitt Romney style Republicans who were bringing in the DEI consultants to begin with, and so they've attacked them as these far left activists who are part of this national plot to indoctrinate your kid in woke ideology, and it's that's come for a lot of conservative suburban folks.
Yeah,
I have 1,000 more things to ask, but I know we're out of time, and it makes me very sad because there are more things that I would wish to talk about. So Amber, anyway,
fantastic conversation. Thank you.
Amber, I'll toss the ball to you to close us out. Give us some homework.
Yeah, so I would just say to everybody, you need to read They Came for the Schools, and you need to listen to Southlake and Grapevine. Whether your kids go to public school, private school, whether you homeschool, it is so important for all of us to understand what is happening in the communities around us, particularly for those of you who, like Erika and I, live in conservative states where this anti-woke agenda is on full throttle. And I think that for a lot of us who feel disaffected right now, the political cycle is coming upon us. And there are people who are trying to do some crazy stuff out here, y'all. And so we need to understand what's going on and understand the playbook so you can understand where you need to be and empower yourself to make the decisions that best protect you and your family. So they came for the schools. You can do like me, buy it on Audible. You can buy a paperback, and Grapevine and Southlake are available wherever you listen to podcasts. So that is the homework. It is a great listen and a great read.
And Mike, we want to just thank you so much for joining us today, for taking the time out. We wish you the best with the book tour. I haven't listened to Grapevine yet, so I'm excited to start that. Summer's here with the kids, so we can all get together as a family again and go through that. So thank you so much for taking the time.
I've enjoyed this so much. Thank you both for having me and for spotlighting the work and for the work you do.
Thank you. And y'all, it can seem like the right decision for us to escape to suburban enclaves to find better lives and educations for our children. But we have to ask ourselves, what does better mean? Schools and districts with higher test scores that will chip away at the self-esteem of our children is likely not better for them. As with most things in this country, we have to go out of our way to be vigilant and understand the specific circumstances that we're placing our children in, because the results can be lifelong. And we know this system was not built for us. So let's do our best to navigate it while protecting our kids at the same time. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Brokish.
All right, good people. Thanks for listening to Brokish. For more episodes, visit us at brokish.com or subscribe, and Brokish will get direct deposited into your favorite podcast app on the 1st and 15th. Share Brokish with your friends and join the conversation on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Music for Brokish is Come Get Some by Blank and Kit. Until next time, goodbye and good luck.
They say when you wear Black Power Media gear, you can accomplish anything. You can play any and every position. Coaching, to kicking, to receiving, to running and juking. And oh my goodness, I see that again in slow motion. Get off me. And you're going to have a lot of haters coming at you, but what you got to do is you got to shake them off and get to your goal and accomplish it. And when that's done, it's a beautiful thing. I'm talking about going hard, extra, for that extra point. And when it's done beautifully, you talking about touchdown. Oh, and the crowd goes wild and they're celebrating with you and everything. Man, let's see that again. Nice.
Black Power Media, baby. That's how we do it.
Now go to blackpowermedia.org and get you some of that gear. Empower yourself today. Yeah.